After 8 days had passed, it was time to circumcise the child. And he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. As you have your seats in the presence of the Lord, I want to thank Pastor Smith for allowing me to stand behind the sacred desk where he has labored faithfully and done a marvelous work. Marvelous work. Amen. Thank God for him. I thank God for his family. Brian whispered to me during the passing of the peace, "We got you." For the songs I asked for, I praise God for your ministry of music. We could just go right on to the invitation and the benediction. Let the choir sing again. I can be ministered to them all day long on the Lord's Day. I praise God for them. I want you to pray with me for this first service on the theme, not sliding the family stone. It's a family affair. A family affair. In 4 short verses, Luke gives us a glimpse of the importance of the Incarnation, the complexity of the Christ event, and God's sacred expectations of the family. Now, that fancy word incarnation means the embodiment of a deity, a God in a human form. In the Christian faith, incarnation means the union of divinity with humanity in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. In the prologue to his powerful preachment, the beloved disciple John in the 4th gospel describes the incarnation as the Word, the Logos, who was in the beginning. I mean, you know it. You've heard it all of your Christian life. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word, the Logos, was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were made by him, and without him nothing was made that has been made. John says in John 1, verse 14, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Holy One in heaven became human, the Alpha and the Omega, the one who has no beginning and no ending, took on a body to demonstrate divinity's investment in humanity. To paraphrase Dr. James Forbes, that became this, so that this could become that. And while so doing, he was neither this or that. He was both this and that. He was tender enough to cry, and simultaneously he was tough enough to die. He was man enough to weep for us, and at the same time he was God enough to be wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. The incarnation is where God takes on a body, embodiment. And to show that God was fully invested in the human condition, Luke tells us about 2 rituals, cultural rituals and sacred rituals, that are family affairs and that involve all 3 bodies of the folk in the first family. The first ritual, religious and cultural, was the circumcision and naming ritual. Students of the Bible will remember a group of 1st and 2nd century believers who were called Gnostics, Gnostics, the Gnostics. The Gnostics did not believe and taught their followers to believe that God was too holy to become a human. Steeped in Greek philosophy and dualistic split thinking, they split the body away from the soul and taught that the soul was good and that the body was evil. Plato was one of the chief architects of that distorted Greek way of thinking. Plato, by the way, sisters, Plato hated women. Plato considered women a necessary evil. Plato and the Gnostics saw men as being thinkers, rational. And Plato and the Gnostics saw women as being emotional, irrational. Men were identified with intellect and women were identified with intercourse. Men represented learning, women represented lust. And the best relationship, Plato said, that any man or woman could have was a relationship that did not involve sex in any way, shape, form, or fashion. In fact, you all still call that kind of relationship today a what? Platonic. After Plato, relationship. The Gnostics, following Platonized Greco-Roman philosophy, the Gnostics said not only is sex dirty, the human body is dirty, and God could not stoop so low as to ever take on a human body, especially the body of a lowly, despised, brown-skinned Jew from Palestine. So the Gnostics taught that what looked like Jesus was actually a projection, like a movie projector, like your screens, images up against a screen. They taught that Jesus didn't have a human body. That's how he could walk on the water. That's how he could walk through doors that were locked. Now, to argue against the Gnostics, John, in his gospel, said the Word became flesh. Not the flash of rays emanating from a divine projector. John said the Word was thirsty in John 4 and asked a Samaritan woman for some water. John said the Word got tired and weary and needed to rest. Mark said that he fell asleep in the back of a boat. Images don't need to sleep. John said the Word went to the grave of Lazarus and wept. Projected beams don't weep. John said when they pierced him in the side with a spear, blood and water came spurting out. Beams don't bleed. John said on one occasion after the bodily resurrection, Jesus barbecued some fish for Peter and his homies. Luke said that the two on the Emmaus road broke bread with the resurrected bread of heaven. Luke also said that the Word in his body in the Garden of Gethsemane also sweat so heavily that sweat fell like great drops of blood. But to put the final nail in the Gnostic philosophical coffin, Luke says in this morning's passage, no, let's start off with the story about his penis. Projected pictures don't have penises. And Mary's baby had a penis. It says on the 8th day, he was circumcised. It was the religious custom, it was cultural, and it was communal. Those of you who have your Bibles, put your bulletin or your finger right here in Luke 2 and just turn back one page to chapter 1, Luke chapter 1. Look at Luke chapter 1, verse 59. This was right after John the Baptist was born. Do you see Luke 1, verse 59? It says on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child. It says they came. It was a religious custom, it was cultural, and it was communal. They came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name that child after his father, Zechariah. New Testament scholars point out that the circumcision and the naming ceremony was a community ritual, and it was a family affair, because normally the father did the circumcising, and the father did the public naming. It was the custom, it was cultural, and it was communal. The community of faith gathered for the ritual. Now, today's passage, Luke 2, verse 4, look at it. Luke 2, verse 4 says, Joseph went from Nazareth to Bethlehem to be registered because that is where his peeps were. That is where his family was from. So in Bethlehem, 8 days after the baby was born in a barn, I've often wondered why no family member made room for them in their homes. Were their homes too small? Were they too poor, too cramped, or too much like some of our families? It's a family affair. 8 days later, they gathered for the circumcision and for the naming ceremony. It was the custom, a religious custom. It was cultural, and it was communal. For almost 20 years of my pastorate, members of the church where I served traveled with me on the study tours that I led to Kemet, you call it Egypt, to Ethiopia, to Senegal, to Cote d'Ivoire, to Ghana, to Togo, to Benin, to the Caribbean, and to Brazil. And African Americans from North America were exposed on those study tours to the cultural continuities between Black American culture, African culture, and biblical culture. One of those cultural continuities is found right here in Luke's Gospel, chapter 1 and chapter 2. On the 8th day, in many parts of Africa, and in some of the quilombos in Maranhão, Brazil, the naming ceremony, especially in Ghana among the Akan, the baby is given its name by the father in a naming ceremony called the outdooring ceremony. In Ghana, it is called outdooring because the baby is kept indoors for the first 7 days of its life. Ghanaians believe that the baby remains attached to the spirit world, attached to God, Jie Nyame, from whom it came for 7 days. The perfect number, a combination of 4 and 3. 4 is the human number, 3 is the holy number. 4 plus 3 equals 7. And after 7 days, God severs the attachment and allows the child to leave the community of the ancestors to enter the community on earth. The child is taken outdoors and laid on a mat at the door of the house, outdooring. It is then brought back inside where it is given its name, and the explanation for the name is given publicly. Name him Jesus. Why? Jesus. Matthew said, he shall save his people from his sins. Publicly, Jesus, Luke says, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. Publicly, Luke verse 1, chapter 13, Zechariah, the angel said, you are to call him John. In Ghana, this is the ceremony of water and wine. What they do is the father takes 3 drops of water and 3 drops of wine, dropping it in the baby's mouth, saying water is water, wine is wine. They may look alike, but always know and tell the difference, tell the truth, call it what it is, not what it looks like. Always be guided by truth. Then in Ghana, just as in Luke, the child is introduced to the community. It is the religious custom, it is cultural, and it is communal. Why is the child introduced to the community? Because the child does not just belong to one person. The child does not just belong to 2 people. The child is a part of the community, and the community is reminded that this is their child and that they must look out for and help raise this child. And in that naming ceremony, the outdooring ceremony, the child is also told what is expected of him or her, even though they're just 8 years old. The first ritual Luke talks about, the first family affair that Luke tells us about, involving 2 bodies, Joseph, who does the cutting, and Jesus, whose foreskin is cut. The first ritual, the first family affair Luke tells us about is the circumcision and the naming ceremony that takes place 8 days after Jesus was born. The second ritual, a part of this family's religion, is found in the next verse, verse 22, the purification ritual, when the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses. Now, because we are not Jewish, we don't know the law of Moses. As a result, we don't know first century Jewish law. And because we live in 21st century North America as Christians, we miss both the powerful imagery and the awesome message that Luke is recording here in verses 22, 23, and 24. Now, just as a footnote or a sidebar, we could do a whole series of sermons before we get to the religious ritual of purification. We could do a whole series of sermons on the second issue I lifted up in the opening sentence of this message. There were 3 things I said that Luke lifts up in 4 verses: the importance, the centrality, the meaning of the Incarnation, where the Word became flesh, where the Holy became human, where that became this and that. The complexity of the Christ event was the second issue, and God's sacred expectations of the family is the third issue. And my sidebar is the several different layers of lessons that leap out from the text when you consider the complexity of Christ being circumcised by a father who is not his father. Jesus is named by Joseph because the messenger from God told Joseph to give him that name. He was a religious man, but Jesus is circumcised by Joseph because he was a responsible man. As mentioned earlier, baby boys were customarily circumcised by their fathers. Joseph knew he wasn't the biological father of Jesus, and so did Mary, but Joseph also knew that he had a theological responsibility and a sociological responsibility to man up, to step up, to stand up, and be what God chose him to be in the life of this baby boy. Oh God, how I wish we had more black men like Joseph who would take responsibility and be the theological fathers, the sociological fathers, the surrogate fathers in the lives of young boys who are not blessed with responsible biological daddies. You don't make the baby, but you can make a powerful and positive impact and difference in that baby's life. Stop asking who the baby daddy and start asking how can I help him or help her to be all that God created them to be. Joseph did what real men do. He took responsibility. We could do a whole series of sermons on that complex issue, but I'm going to leave it alone and just lift it up as an aside. I got to hurry on to the third issue, God's sacred expectations of the family. One aspect of those expectations is found in the second ritual that Luke describes in verses 22 and 24. The ritual of naming and circumcision, like the Ghanaian outdooring ritual, takes place in a family 8 days after the boy is born. But the ritual of purification takes place 40 days after a boy is born. Now, he didn't have to put this when he was writing it because everybody in that culture knew that. They didn't live in Hazelcrest, Telly Park. They understood. 40 days. And where the ritual of naming and circumcision takes place in the home, and the community, the extended family, the Ubuntu gathers. The ritual of purification takes place in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is only 6 miles from Bethlehem, so for 6 weeks, Joseph and Mary stayed in Bethlehem so they wouldn't have to make that long trip from Nazareth back down to Jerusalem or make the grueling trip from Bethlehem, where he was born, up to Nazareth. That's 84 miles with a brand new baby, and then make the trip back down to Jerusalem, 75 miles, all within a 6-week stretch of time. So they stayed in Bethlehem for 40 days. And Mary and Joseph, together as a family, took Jesus up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. When it came time for their purification, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, a religious ritual. They went to worship, a religious ritual, and they took a sacrificial offering. See, you can give without worshiping. A whole bunch of y'all just did that at Christmas. You gave because you didn't want to hear no hate. You can give without worshiping, but God knows you cannot worship without giving. Giving is acknowledging that everything you have belongs to God. Everything you got is a gift from God. Giving an offering is giving back symbolically to God, who has given substantively to us. And if you will please notice the message that Luke gives us in describing the gift that they gave God. It's an important message. Jesus was born into a poor family. Their religion spelled out, write it down so you can look it up. Leviticus 12:8. Their religion spelled out, their religious law, their religion spelled out that everybody can't give the same thing, but everybody can give something. The rich were required to give an expensive offering. The rich gave one thing, but the poor were only expected to give 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons. The poor gave something else. God comes into history on the side of the poor. God takes on human flesh as a baby in a barn. Jesus was born into a poor family, but his poor family worshiped the Lord not because they had a lot to give and not because they had so much to give, but because God had given them so much. It was their religion. I said it earlier, let me say it again. It was their custom, a religious custom. It was their culture, and it was communal, their community, their religious Ubuntu. Now, I get tickled every time I hear some miseducated savant say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I get tickled because all it is saying to me is that they don't know what religion means. Enslaved Africans knew what religion meant, but educated multiculturals don't know what religion means. Let me tell you what religion means. 3 years ago, I was team teaching a course at Drew Theological Seminary in New Jersey with my advisor, Dr. Charles Long, the African-American guru in the field of the history of religions. Now, the 6 years I spent in a PhD program at the University of Chicago Divinity School studying under Dr. Charles Long, Dr. Gersta Alstrom, Dr. Martin Marty, Dr. Jonathan Smith, Dr. Mircea Eliade, and Dr. Fazlur Rahman, the world's leading Islamic historian back in the 1970s, I thought those 6 years were pressure, like no other pressure in the world. But I was wrong. To be asked to teach a course, Dr. Smith, alongside of and as a colleague of the man who taught me for an intensive course where the students get an entire semester's worth of work in 1 week, 40 contact hours in 5 days. That took pressure to a new altitude. There is not even a word to describe how scared I was. Team teaching alongside my advisor, the man who taught me for 6 years. And on Saturday of that intensive, the pressure went through the ceiling and bad matters got worse. Dr. Jerry Carter, you heard him at Hampton, Pastor Smith. Dr. Carter invited us to bring our class from the seminary campus over to his church campus, the Calvary Baptist Church in Morristown, New Jersey. In the morning, we taught as usual, Dr. Long, 20 students, and me. Then, after a delicious home-cooked lunch, a Baptist church cooking, y'all, fried chicken, baked chicken, potato salad, greens, cornbread, mac and cheese, sweet tea, apple cobbler, sweet potato pie, all of his officers, deacons and trustees, and all of his Christian education department, Bible teachers, Sunday school teachers, vacation Bible school teachers, new member class teachers, BTU teachers, all of them 200 strong. They not only ate lunch with us in the fellowship hall, they then sat in class with us from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 3 o'clock in the afternoon in their Family Life Center, as Dr. Long and I were to lecture to our class for an hour, each of us, and then give them, his members, an opportunity to ask questions for that last third hour. I want you to get a visual of this pressure. I got Dr. Charles Long, PhD from the University of Chicago, behind me. And church folk, he said, Jeremiah, you go first. He's sitting back here. And in front of me, I got church folk from across the spectrum, Baptist church folk, some of whom think that Jesus only speaks in red letters. In the 17th century English King James translation, Jesus didn't even speak English. Now that's who I got in front of me. Dr. Long back here, and he better not say nothing wrong up here. Folk who don't know me, ain't never met me, but who had seen Fox News sound bites and butchered news clips of me. So I lectured, and I lectured primarily to our students and secondarily to those sitting in our class trying to use language that lay people, not just seminarians, could understand. I lectured on the sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about the origin of the spirituals. I talked about the African spirituals on the continent of Africa and in all three Americas, North America, Central America, South America, and in the Caribbean, reggae spirituals by the Waters of Babylon. I talked about sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about the shape note choirs, Some of y'all know them as the do-re-mi choirs, the sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about meter hymns and meter singing, long meter, short meter, and common meter. Sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about the black hymnodists like Charles Albert Tindley, who wrote We'll Understand It Better By and By, like Lucy Campbell, who wrote He'll Understand and Say Well Done, Something Within Me That Holds the Reins. I talked about the sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about the holiness church music of the 19th century with the beats that they brought to the hymn. I talked about the music of the Azusa Street Revival and the birth of American Pentecostalism. I talked about the music of Pentecostalism on the continent of Africa before and after American Pentecostal missionaries got to Africa. I talked about the sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about Thomas Dorsey and the birth of gospel music. I talked about the transition from quartets and quintets to choirs. I talked about what happened when James Cleveland moved from just a group of singers to a choir with Peace Be Still in 1957. I talked about the sacred music of the black religious tradition. I talked about the transition from pinanas and regular guitars to Hammond B3s, to Yamaha keyboards, electric guitars, drum sets, washboards, congas, saxophones, from Walter and Tremaine Hawkins to Richard Smallwood, Marvin Sapp, Tamala Mann, and Donald Lawrence. I lectured on the sacred music of the black religious tradition, from Cissy Houston to Whitney Houston, from Mattie Moss Clark to the Clark sisters. I was on it, y'all, for a whole hour. For a whole hour, I talked about our music and the black sacred tradition, and then I sat down. Dr. Long stood up, and my blood froze with his opening sentence. After he stood up, he said, "Jeremiah is confused." Oh, God. In fact, I said, "Oh, no, WTF." Mama Lois, WTF means, what's this foolishness? Jeremiah confused. I had flashbacks to the arguments Dr. Long and I used to have when I was a student. His next sentence, however, lifted the pressure up off me and shifted the atmosphere in that Family Life Center auditorium. He said, "I'm going to confuse him some more, and I'm going to help him and help y'all all at the same time." Jeremiah lecturing about the music of black religion. Do y'all know what religion means? He said the Africans who sang, "Have you got good religion?" They knew what religion means. See, religion comes from the word religio. Religio. It's a compound word, a word made up of two words, re, which means again, and ligare, which means to bind. Religion is that to which you are bound. Black folk, Dr. Long said, black folk ain't bound to Kant or Weber's Wissenschaftliche. Black folks ain't bound to no European philosophical category or existential enlightenment epistemology. Black folk are bound to a God who sits high and looks low. Black folk are bound to a God who can take a crooked stick and hit a straight lick. Black folk are bound to those brought here against their will in chains and on slave ships. Black folk are bound to the bodies of those lynched and left hanging as strange fruit. To what and to whom are you bound? When you say you ain't religious, that means you ain't bound to no thing or nobody. Boy, you are bound to them old saints who never saw the inside of a college except to clean it. You are bound to them deacons who pressed $5 in your hand when you headed off to college and who whispered in your ear, "I'm praying for you." You are bound to a community that has known the auction block, known the slave driver's whip, known the racist country and the hatred of white supremacy. You are bound to Tamir Rice. You are bound to Oscar Grant. You are bound to Renisha McBride. You are bound to Michael Brown. You are bound bound to Eric Garner. You are bound to a family whose blood we cannot allow to be shed in vain. Jesus' family shows us that some stuff you do is done because it's a part of the custom of your religion, that which binds you together. Some stuff you do because it's a part of your culture, and some stuff you do because you are bound to a community. In South Africa, they call it Ubuntu. I need you, you need me. We're bound together. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me, bound together. Agree with me, bound together. We're all a part of God's. Turn to your neighbor right now. Tell your neighbor, you are important to me. I need you to survive. I'm bound to you, and you are bound to me. You pray for me. I'll pray for you. I love you. I won't hurt you with words from my mouth. We need each other to survive. Come on and stand to your feet today.